Okay, budget meeting called to order at 7:30. All board members are here. Any public comments? I've seen any public
I haven't
comments?
seen any.
Okay, Steve, can you talk us through number 5?
Sure, thank you,
should
Jack.
probably approve the agenda first, please.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Jack. So just as a reminder, the facility committee is meeting at 8:30. So we have an hour to cover 3 topics. It should be plenty of time. The 3 topics are where we ended the 21-22 budget, a discussion around the 22-23 budget process. Specifically, I want to talk through the topic of the property tax rate and the connection to our referendum communication. And then the third topic is related to beginning the planning process for the 23-24 year. So we'll jump in first to talk about 21-22. Just as a reminder for the committee, early on in the spring, we established a goal of trying to add over $1 million to the Fund 10 fund balance in the 21-22 fiscal year. The initial reason for doing so is the fact that we were not aware at that time of that additional ESSER 3 funding that we received. And we were seeking to prepare ourselves for the 22-23 budget, where we knew we had a deficit because of the revenue limit increase of 0. So we were planning ahead, trying to save over $1 million for the next fiscal year. We then learned about the additional ESSER 3 funding later on in the spring. However, this committee decided to continue with the course that we were on, which was to try to, again, have over about $1 million remaining at the end of the fiscal year. So our administrative team remained moving forward with that objective, even though we did learn about the ESSER funding. A couple of the reasons why we continued with that objective. Number one, building our fund balance is going to improve our bond rating if the referendum passes this fall. And secondly, we were in discussions about a possible reimbursement resolution prior to the referendum, which would have caused us to have to use anywhere between $500,000 and $800,000. So the objective remained. So now I just want to share with you, if Rebecca, if you could pull up the treasurer's report, we could talk through how the year ended up. And one remaining point I would like to make is this committee also recommended fully funding our payment to Fund 73. So just keep that in mind, that we did also make our full payment to our post-employment benefit trust fund. So the line that says Fund 10 General Fund, you could go all the way to the right and you would see the change in fund balance was a positive 1.2 million. So that was, we exceeded our goal. We were able to add over $1 million to our Fund 10 fund balance and fully fund our Fund 73 trust payment. Down at the bottom, I do have that second footnote, says the ending fund balance for Fund 10 is equal to 15.1% of the Fund 10 22-23 expenditure budget. So the board has a goal of a 15% fund balance in Fund 10. So between the prior fiscal year where we saved over $1 million, in this fiscal year where we saved over $1 million, we've now gotten back to that level. If you can recall, our bond rating dropped a spring ago in May. And one of the concerns that caused it to drop was the fact that Moody's was not recognizing our Fund 41 or our capital projects budget. So the board made a decision to move our maintenance expenditures and tax levy into Fund 10 and spend down our expenditures in Fund 40. But between last fiscal year and this fiscal year, we've been able to bounce back in 2 years to get to the 15.1% excluding Fund 41. So we are going to be in an excellent position if the referendum passes to go back out for a new bond rating prior to issuing debt, to be able to show 2 years of improvement to our fund balance. So this puts us in a really strong position. A couple other things I just want to note. You see the negative change in fund balance in Fund 40. Again, that's been planned. That's the connection between Fund 10 and Fund 40, where the board's objective is to spend down the funds in Fund 40 and move our maintenance expenditures over time to Fund 10. In Fund 50, you can see we started the year with the beginning fund balance of 0. This committee a year ago had recommended, a little over a year ago, had recommended a increase in the Fund 50 fees to try to rebuild a fund balance. So that was accomplished. We go into the next school year with $138,000 in fund balance, which does allow us then to expend maintenance and equipment requests from the food service department into the food service fund. So that's a real positive. The employee benefit trust fund, you can see that it's built up to almost $8 million. That's with the challenges in the stock market in this previous spring. So that fund continues to do well. Obviously, we mentioned we fully funded the payment for this year. In total, across all of the district funds, we added $1.5 million to our fund balances from where we were a year ago.
Steve, remind me what Fund 20 special projects, what falls in there?
Sure, there's 2 things in Fund 20. There's Fund 21, which is considered the gift fund. And then there's Fund 27, which is special education. In Fund 27, there can be no balance for the DEPI, so it has to be 0. So the balance that remains at the end of the year in Fund 21 is all of our scholarships, our student organizations. Previously, the DPI required those funds to be accounted for in what was called Fund 60 or Fund 72. But we had to move all of that over to what's now called Fund 21. So that's where all of that activity is kept.
See, for the Fund 41, there's an annual deposit of some 300,000+ from the previous 2014 referendum. Has that started going into Fund 10 as the 21-22 school year, or is that starting 22-23?
That's an excellent question, because that is one of the 3 things I'm looking for feedback on this committee for. So let me see if there's any other questions on this document. Otherwise, I could jump into the 3 things we're looking for feedback on. Okay, so the first one is what Mark just brought up. So the 21-22 school year is the first year that we move that money into Fund 10 instead of Fund 41. So my question for the committee is, Rebecca, if you can scroll down just a little bit further. Can you pull up that board policy? So this board policy was revised last summer to reflect that action of moving that $300,000 into the Fund 10. The board policy states that funds allocated from the November 4th, 2014 referendum of $300,000 shall be added to the budget on an annual basis committed to Fund 10. So the Fund 10 part was new, because previously we had used Fund 41. Any unspent funds will carry forward to the next fiscal year and will remain either in the maintenance or technology department. So a quick reminder on the policy. So Rebecca, would you mind jumping back for a moment? And then can you pull up the fund balance accounting sheet 1, please? No, I'm sorry, you could grab the next one. Sorry about that. It's the following attachment, that one. Maybe you could make it a little bit bigger. So we, on an annual basis, track the carryover balances and the fund balances for various specific purposes. So as an example, you could see under 10Q 938900 balance June 30th, 2021, you see Prairie School. So we track that for each building and department. The question that I was looking to ask the committee is, would you like to see the 300,000 investment that we moved into Fund 10 tracked separately, which would mean we would use that same approach that we take under each of the schools and departments under that 938900? Or do you just want it to be a part of our larger fund balance? We have multiple fund balance accounts. One of them is our larger fund balance. This is the one that's tracked for each building and department. There's not a right or a wrong answer to it. It's just whether or not, as a committee, you think it should be something that future board members could more easily track. If that's the case, what we would do with that 300,000 that Mark just brought up is, you see that line that says capital projects, we'd add it to that. And so it would be sitting there as a placeholder, but ultimately the allocation of fund balance is a school board decision. And this document goes to the September board meeting asking for approval of the end of the year balances. So my first question for the committee is, would you like to see that 300,000 added here so it's easier to see? Or do you want it just to be, just for us to know it's included in the larger fund balance within Fund 10?
The dollar value also looks like the technology already has it as a place marker. I'd be in favor for having it.
Great. I think for future boards and for the public to know where that money is sitting.
Okay, so I'll make that change when we bring this to the board in September.
Should there be a change in that policy to note that we're doing it, or is that necessary?
No, that's not necessary, because then we'll know in future years, we're just gonna plan on doing that.
So from the technology, those are the iPads and so forth. Does that go away? You know, is that spent down every year?
Generally, yes, but technology's done a good job of planning out a long-term plan to slowly purchase what is needed in each year. So they do have a decent balance because we time out our purchases over time to just buy what's needed really for that year. So when we do have a year that has more devices that are called for replacement on our schedule, we have the ability to tap into this to do it.
We're not leasing any of those, are we?
No, all purchases. Second thing that I'm looking for feedback on, Rebecca, is at the bottom of this page. It's on the one you're on. So if you see at the bottom where off to the right, it says traditional process. What you see here is the column on the left would be the balances as if it was at the beginning of the year. And if we froze all activity for the 21-22 school year, that is what the budget committee's action was. So your action was to seek, spending freeze for the remainder of the year and to allow buildings and departments to have their beginning of the year balance, but then the end of the year balance would go back towards the district's fund balance for our long-term goals. I wanted to show you to the right would be what this would look like if we did our normal end of the year process. So you can see the difference between the two. The left would result in a balance of $1,033,000 for buildings and departments. The right would result in a balance of $1,181,000. You can see the difference at like a Prairie Elementary School as an example. They'd either have a carryover of $17,678 or $25,000. The difference between the two is because Prairie didn't spend $8,000 of their budget this year. In the end, the dollar amount is not that significant, and it's all a part of the district fund balance one way or another. But Allie and I have to prepare a fund balance end of the year approval process for the September board meeting. So we were seeking your feedback on whether you want to continue with what we established in the spring, or we could look at what it would have been, which is in the traditional process in the right-hand column, if we would do this like we normally would. And I wanted to put this in front of you because obviously we did accomplish our objectives of adding the 1.2 million, fully funding Fund 73, and in putting this in front of you to take a look at whether or not you have a preference for one way or another.
So what you're saying here is that we froze everything and fund balance is $1 million plus. And if we wouldn't have, it would have been about 1.2.
Right. Yeah.
So our freezing, we're going to save 200,000
on building and department budgets. So the rest of it was all salary, benefits, and other budgets like open enrollment, all the other major dollar amounts. But in this area, yes, but I would say it's actually larger than that, Jack, because if you see how far down maintenance went from 311 to 85, so that one went down quite a bit. So the others actually saved more than that, because that's over a $200,000 drop. The concern with going with the left is that like maintenance would have 311,000 instead of 85 like it should be, or the curriculum department as an example went into the year with 33,000. If you look to the right, they would end up, I'm really combining elementary and secondary because we're still working on splitting the account codes. They'd have 100,000. So there's some huge differences between.
Is that a problem? When we froze it, would curriculum have needed money that they weren't allowed to spend?
Oh, I'm sure there would have been expenditures that
That would concern me, is taking that kind of money out of the curriculum budget.
The traditional process would more align with the expenditures and the savings that each building and department had.
Mm-hmm.
However, the process on the left is really what the committee endorsed in the spring and continue to move forward. So as far as the members of our administrative team know, the process on the left is what's been approved. I'm showing this to you because we were able to accomplish our objectives and just want you to have a chance to weigh in on this before we bring it to the September board meeting. I don't know, Randy, do you have a thought on
This was a
this?
strategy to try to reach our objectives. So once they've been reached through other means, I think the question is, do you want to stick with that or do you want to kind of back off on this one? It really doesn't impact our bigger scheme of the budget. It just allows us to go back to some of the traditional processes for the fund balance in these departments.
So,
But the effect, as Sean mentioned with curriculum, where so much of their work is done in the summer, does that limit the amount of curriculum writing and PD and everything else that normally would go into that?
It's
I mean, that seems like
more,
a huge sum.
it's more, I would describe it in the area of purchases, because the curriculum writing was funded. And then the curriculum department did bring in some requests to our previous budget committee about some initiatives, and that was funded. I would say it's more related to, I'll call it textbooks, software, workbooks, traditional type purchases. So the things you're referencing, Mark, did continue as normal, but they definitely took the freeze to heart in the curriculum area and saved quite a bit of money. It's just really a reflection of, which approach do you think makes the most sense?
So in the athletic department, in the traditional process, they would have less.
Yes.
Why when we freeze a budget, where did they get the extra?
So what happens is a lot of building and departments are planning ahead to use their carryover budget. And they would have already made some of those purchases by the time we got to the spring. So athletic was using some of their carryover. And so you have departments that were moving ahead previously with some of those expenditures, because the action that we took was middle or later of the spring. So a lot of these patterns had already been in place. It was just from that point forward, we made the changes.
so if you look at this, can you, instead of just saying yes to the left or yes to the right, is there a way to say maybe we should be moving more into, the athletic, or, can we mix and match?
Absolutely. Yep. And Allie and I were actually thinking about that, because there is some logic to saying
Yeah.
that, like, athletics should probably end with 41,000, right? Because they started the year with 60, spent down some of their balance, probably shouldn't get 60, probably should have 41, right? It probably would make a lot of sense, Jack, to consider an approach like that, where you would look line by line and say which number actually makes sense for each department. Because you would look and you would say, like, athletics, you'd look at the 41, maintenance, you'd look at the 85, but technology, which saved quite a bit of money for future purposes, you'd probably look at the 498. And we could put together a third column
Yeah.
that would reflect that.
Yeah.
And we could show that at the September board meeting as well, if that's your preference.
Yeah, that seems to make sense because, some of those numbers.
If you look at Prairie Heritage and Arboretum, this would be their beginning balance, right?
Right, yep.
So, shouldn't there be some equity there so that they're all equal, or spending money differently, or?
Spending money differently between the schools, yeah. But if the committee's interested, Ally and I can throw a third column on there, which would be a blend of the two. And then you'd have an opportunity to take a look at that at the September board meeting. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
That would make sense.
Why is there the disparity between intermediate and middle school in terms of with the traditional process and what is? I mean, it seems Is it just different budgetary needs or?
So a lot of it, Mark, had to do with where a budget was at the time we put the freeze in.
Okay,
So like as an example, if the intermediate school was planning some end of the year expenditures and we put the freeze in,
okay,
you can see that they ended up with quite a large balance because at that point they had money that hadn't been expended. But the middle school, just off the top of my head, was very likely further along in their spending cycle at that point.
Yeah.
And therefore, once we put the freeze in place, it didn't have as much of an impact as it did at the middle school. Because you got to remember, we did that like 9 months in and everyone had been, 3/4 of the way through their process at that point.
So would the intermediate and the middle school on a yearly basis get the same amount of money to their budget?
So we have an allocation model per student
Oh,
that all 3 elementaries are equal. The intermediate's a little bit more, middle school's a little bit more, and then the high school's the most per student.
I get that. That makes sense.
You have to look at like middle school's got different programs.
Right. So these balances just show the history of spending
Yep.
and
Yes.
saving and
Yep.
I get that.
well,
You also have newer and older buildings, you have different levels of funding, things that are coming through. So I mean, when you start to look at like the elementary schools, those are pretty close. If you go back years ago, they were never that close. So
Right.
that's actually pretty
Right.
equitable in comparison to where we've been.
right. Yes, question I have in terms of for building management, your total savings, you're looking at about $150,000 with this concept. With where we are with ESSER funding and everything else, would it be beneficial to go back to the traditional and give the specific areas a little bit more control for future planning?
Well, that was the plan for the carryover budget is to
Right.
plan for those more expensive items.
I can just think of maybe one example. You get X amount through tech for your building, but you have more needs for tech than you get through the tech budget. Your carryover budget, it can allow that to happen, which again gives the flexibility to provide the essential resource that maybe Heritage needs that maybe the intermediate school doesn't, or vice versa. So
So in the
I
main,
propose we
go
might,
with the traditional, except, in maintenance, it's such a difference.
Remember, we'll be
Let's
at-
have these guys just go through and put in, where they think we should fall. And I think the other thing, when you look at the athletic department, is $41,000 enough? Or should we add, we've got, a lot of clubs, or not clubs, but participation.
I think what we could do is we could make a third column. We could kind of review each of kind of the histories behind them and kind of what brought them to those numbers. And we can bring forth what we would view as kind of a recommended third column. That's kind of a blend of the two. Then you can take a look at it.
Sounds good.
The third feedback item under this column is the last budget committee meeting made a recommendation to hold on any additional allocation of funds for the branding effort until we reach the end of the year. So my question for the committee is, would you like to see us add a branding budget and allocate like $25,000 from the end of the year funds towards those efforts to continue the next phase of it? And I would like to add that in if it's something you would like to see us do. Since we were going to wait until we saw the end of the year results, we could just add it into that spreadsheet that you saw from Rebecca, and we would just add another column for 25,000, which would provide Annie with the ability to move into the next phase of that. And then we would call it a day for this year, because we'd have the initial 25,000, we'd have the allocation of this end of the year money, and then Annie would then prioritize the additional 25,000. And then we would revisit this at a point in the future when we would want to consider the efforts for the following year.
Makes sense.
Sounds good.
So how far along in the branding? About 95% now?
Annie,
Is she negotiating well?
She's doing well. She's doing well.
Anyways,
Yeah, that's a lot of freebies.
Yes, she does.
so if you're okay with that, I would add
Let's
that
do
in
that.
then when I bring it back to the next,
we all
Sounds
agree.
great.
okay?
Move on.
Okay. So for this topic, this is one that I'm wanting everyone to have a chance to think about and reflect on whether or not you would like to see our referendum communications be revised. But obviously, we're not going to make a decision on the tax rate until October. But here's what the topic is. So during the month of August, the Wisconsin Department of Revenue releases municipal property value information that always gives school districts a little bit of a clue as to where our numbers are going to go in October. And Rebecca, if you want to scroll down for a minute, if you could open that attachment up. So this document is from a colleague of mine who spends a lot of time on working through these type of financial estimates. And what he did is he took the data that came out from the Wisconsin Department of Revenue, and in the box in the upper right-hand corner came up with what he believes is the closest estimate we can come up with at this time for the property value change in our district. This is an estimate because the municipal data that comes out in August is not broken down by school district. So obviously the village of Waunakee is entirely in the Waunakee Community School District. So we can draw conclusions as to, with the village of Waunakee being our largest municipality and around a 15% type increase, that we're going to see a very significant increase in equalized value this October. So keep that in mind, that the estimate is looking to be quite significant for the equalized value. We will get that data in early October. If you want to close that, Rebecca. Why that matters is the financial plan that the board saw in July from Eric Cass assumed a 5% increase in property values. So at a 5% increase in property values, we were able to put together an estimated financial plan that kept the tax rate at $10.89. So the topic is important because the communication that we're sharing with the public in the postcard, I'll read what it currently says. The referendum questions accomplish the school board's goal of maintaining the existing tax rate over time. Since 2018-19, the board has maintained a consistent tax rate of approximately $10.89 per $1,000 of property value. So if you look at that bottom paragraph, I wrote an alternative that we may want to consider for the communication. The alternative says the school board has a goal of maintaining or decreasing the current tax rate of $10.89 across fiscal years. The November 2022 referendum questions maintain a tax rate of $10.89 for the 22-23 school year, assuming a 5% increase in property values. Property value increases above 5% will result in a reduction of the tax rate.
Is that tax rate or mill rate?
Same thing. Some people call it mill rate, some people call it tax rate, but yeah.
It's the 1089.
So the language at the bottom would indicate to the public that if we do see a 15% increase in property values, the board intends to decrease the tax rate below the 1089. If we were to keep a tax rate of 1089, it would result in tax increases clearly on existing homes. The reason for that is the 15% is not new construction. The 15% is a combination of new construction, individuals who might have remodeled a basement, added a deck, whatever, and existing home values increasing. So if we were to maintain a 1089 this fall with the 15% increase in property values, the existing homes will see increases that we weren't intending to do. We also would have to increase the tax levy itself to get to $10.89, which would put the board in a position of not only issuing new debt, but also doing a debt service defeasance or repayment as well. Because to get to the 1089 at a 15% level, we would have additional funds in our Fund 39 tax levy that would be available for a defeasance. So the topic is a big one. Obviously, we have some time to think it through. My question is this committee comfortable with using the language or language like the bottom for our public communication regarding the referendum? Or would you prefer to keep what we're currently saying, which is the board has a goal of maintaining a $10.89 mill rate?
I would tend to lean towards this. You know,
To change it.
to change it. You know, basically, we're targeting maintaining a 10.89. However, you know, conditions change.
Well,
which we assume they will.
and the reason we've been at 1089 is to try to maintain an even taxation, and if we can improve versus, you know, if values go up, we're not doing that. So yeah, I would say the change makes sense.
And I do think this will be a question that will come up quite a bit throughout the fall, which is why I wanted to prompt the conversation, because I know that community members will be asking the board, are you keeping this at 1089 even if property values go up 15%?
Yeah.
So
That's hard to explain.
that's hard to explain. And I do think the bottom makes more sense, because as a board, you can wait and see what the actual property values are in October yet be able to explain to the public, you are not sticking to 1089 no matter what happens in October.
So Steve, the word after 5%, it will. Are you confident that we will reduce it, or should we use a word like may reduce it?
Yeah, that's probably a better word, because
Are you-
obviously the entire board has to weigh in on this. And that's a decision that wouldn't be made until the end of October. So I think that's a better word to use.
I think from a talking point perspective with our board members, we have to remember that part of what we started off with when we started talking about the mill rate and tax rate was we had a property value increase in our initial spreadsheets as deep up here 3%. We increased it to 5%, basically looking at some trend data. And now we're looking at some more actual data of what potentially can come forward. So it's got some flexibility to it. I don't think it was ever an intent of the board to just kind of stick with one number.
Right.
And I think that's part of why Steve and Ally are bringing that forward, is because this is drastically different than the 5% that we were kind of projecting.
So, you know, we've been projecting like 3 and 5%, we're at 15, obviously that's new construction, lower construction. Is inflation factored into that 15%?
Yes, that's definitely a part of it, is existing property values and the inflated values related to it. And that's why if we did stay at 1089 no matter what,
Right.
existing housing stock will see a property tax increase related to just simply the inflation of their existing homes. And one other thing just to share with you is obviously our financial advisors, PMA. This data is causing the other school boards that have the same goal that we do, like Verona, to revisit this topic. Verona has a referendum plan for November. They were looking at a consistent tax rate strategy. They've been doing that for a few years. Their board is now revisiting that because of the significant increase in property values there as well. So I think you're going to see boards reevaluate, even those that looked at consistent tax rates, because of that large increase in values. So we won't be the only ones looking at making a change to that.
So I guess we all agree to that?
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Is that what you need?
Yep.
Are you looking, Steve, then you'll change that, just for clarity on the postcard?
Yep.
And move that piece forward.
So the next topic, we have a few minutes to talk about, is really starting to plan ahead. What we're looking to do is get your feedback on a document that we've started based on some of the discussions that came up at the school board retreat and some of the discussions we've had with Jack about looking at a longer term planning process and specifically honing in on, you know, staffing and FTE and enrollment changes. And we're looking to get some feedback from you on some of the data we've put together. We've started with just the data for one group. So you can take a look at some of the capabilities that we do have. We're trying to get your feedback as to whether or not that's helpful, and then how deep you would like to go with that type of data, because we can go as deep as you want and provide as much information as you want. But Rebecca, would you mind pulling that up?
Is it this one?
No, I'm sorry, that one right there.
I guess I'm looking at this as we start, you know, Steve put this chart together. But I think if you look at our core competencies, is really putting teachers in front of kids, right? And I think what this starts to do is it starts to give us a picture of, you know, administration, you know, different groups that we want, so that we can kind of on a budget, on an annual basis, say, okay, this is where we want to stay. You know, we want, you know, administration as a function of how many students do we have? How do we improve efficiencies and things like that? So it just helps guide, I think, the process on staffing levels.
So I'm just gonna quickly just show you what the data is, and then the last part is where I think it would be the most helpful for our planning. So this is simply data that shows our teacher-student ratios over time. As you know, we have been very consistent in the area of teaching. You can see 14.2, 14.2. And then the first year of the pandemic, when we actually had put a plan in place to lower class sizes in several grade levels, that ended up being combined with a drop in student enrollment that fall. That resulted in going down to the 12.8, and then we were at 12.7. So this is historical data that is one way to look at, like, across time, our teaching FTE and our enrollment. Mark, you have a question?
Yeah. The thing, I have a problem with this chart. It really doesn't show the student-teacher ratio. It
No.
shows the student-staff ratio. And so if I'm someone in the public that doesn't understand, I'm going to think, oh, the class have 14 kids in the classroom. And to me, this misleads the public and it misleads our planning. To me, the info we need is teaching staff to student versus entire staff ratio.
And then the additional staff in the building.
Right.
So, we've added social workers and psychologists, and we've added so many more people that certainly help our students. But it's exactly what you said, Mark. It's not our ratio.
And as you speak, maybe that's the other thing we need. So you have the teaching staff to student
Yes.
ratio and then support staff to ratio.
And it would be so helpful to have it by K2. Every time we have a change in a policy with our numbers, we see where we're at with that policy. That to me would be helpful. And then here's our other category of, certified people in the building. And here's our
Administration
in the building.
firms.
Yeah, I agree. This is just misleading to the public.
I think
because-
that's exactly where we're trying to get to. I think this is a chart to say, hey, this is how we can show it. But I think what you need to do is actually, to your point, get to the teachers per student, the support staff per student, so that, you can start understanding, what is your staffing level and where do we want to be from a staffing level standpoint? Because and it helps guide the conversation, I think, when somebody says, hey, I want another person. So it's not like we're not going to add that next person, but why do you need that next person? What's driving that? Is it, extraneous? We need more pairs because we had a, major problem, with an influx of some challenging kids last year.
I think you have to look at it from two perspectives. One is that when you're looking at comparison data across districts, this is the number you're going to see. Right. So if you want to say, how do we compare to DeForest and Prairie, et cetera, this is the type number. But what you're asking for is you want to see it disaggregated out to see what's it look like in some of the other. That's fair, because all of what you just said, how we're staffed with any of our staff across the district in any employment group plays into our number here. But I think this is a good piece from a comparative perspective.
Right.
But then you can break it down and disaggregate it down to see kind of what does it look like per those groups. So I think that's fair, but I wouldn't want to throw that away. You still have to have that, but you need to have some supplemental data that also gets to what you're asking.
Yeah, I really appreciate this dialogue, because that's what we're hoping to find out, is what would be helpful to you. Because as Randy said, this is the comparable data that could be pulled out, but we can absolutely go deeper with things like K2, where we have a certain board class size. and we can track the core classroom teachers. That's easy for us to do. And we could go further than this to really help get you that information. That would be helpful. Rebecca, could you slide to the next for just a moment?
I think what this also does is it starts to drive metrics. You know, how are we doing? You know, overall, you know, from a budgeting standpoint, from a staffing standpoint, you know, it gives you more of a picture.
This one, just again, quickly, like Randy said, is where you can pull all of the Dane County districts and you can get a quick sense of, you know, that same data that we showed, where are the other Dane County districts at? So it's an opportunity for us to take our data first over history, then come back and compare it to where our county peers are at. If you want to slide down to the next one, Rebecca. This is I find this one to be interesting because this is a way to show over time the correlation between your student enrollment and your staff changes. And again, we can run this for all sorts of different groups. So like Jack, as an example, we can pull out principals, we can pull out central office, we can pull out administration in general. And you can see how over time processes are either aligned or misaligned as our enrollment has changed. So this is just truly a different way of looking at like that first slide. This is just over time, two different lines showing you how the two of them work together. And Rebecca, if you could go to the next one. Where I think this could be helpful to us and where I imagine being able to help plan into the future is then by taking our enrollment. So this is just a quick 5-year projection of our enrollment that comes out of our financial data system. And then Rebecca, if you could go to the next one. So we can take, as an example, our FTE, what we consider to be a standard, apply it against future enrollment projections, and have a far right-hand column that would show where we believe we're going to need to be. We can then do this across a variety of categories to show you what I think would be a nice complete picture of over a 4 to 5 year period of time based on enrollment projections. And again, we could break it down further, K2, 3, 6, that type of data, where you could see based on enrollment projections, based on staffing data, where would we need to be able to maintain our current ratios, which I think would get us to the point where like a request for like a school psychologist wouldn't be a surprise, because we would all agree that there's a certain ratio we would like to see. We can then compare that over time. We can compare it to enrollment projections, and you could see a couple of years ahead of time, it's very likely our school psychologist FTE would maybe need to change in year 2, or school social worker year 3, or paraeducator year 2. And you could see what I think would be a nice complete picture looking at enrollment projections compared to staffing ratios, so that I think we could put ourselves in a situation. So a lot of the requests would look more organized. They look like they're being planned further out. But I just wanted to get like your initial feedback as Allie and I start working to put this together for 23-24. Do you like this? I've already heard disaggregate and get some of the core classroom numbers broken down, but in general, do you think this is the right direction?
I think it's a help. I don't think it can strictly guide us, because we know students change. you know, society changes, needs change. We never had social workers to the extent we had them 10 years ago. I think it's a guide. I think it may be helpful, but it can't be, you know, strictly what we use because there's so many other factors of what we need in schools to help students because students change.
But I think, again, what it does is it helps the planning process, you know. And let's say you've got a social worker that you say, we're gonna put in year 2, but you get a superstar that you identify in year 1, you know, we could pick that up. And I think the other thing that this helps is, you know, HR, when they're looking at, okay, this is what I've got to plan for, you know, as far as an increase. Obviously, we're going to have people leaving and coming and going, which you're not going to be able to change, but at least it gives them some type of heads up as well.
I mean, it's a guide. How are we doing this year with our student enrollment and our teacher needs? Did we have to hire another? I thought that at one point we were looking at possibly needing a garden for spring. I mean, did we need to?
We are under our class size maximum in every grade. We are at 2 of the schools, I think it's either kindergarten and first grade, we're full with recent move-ins. So we're having to move students to Heritage.
And that's what we will do. We're
And
not
that's
gonna go above
yep,
those numbers.
Yep, we won't go above and we move students to Heritage. I don't think we've had to move anybody yet. Julie's been keeping Randy and I appraised of the situation. We're just getting right to
And
the
Heritage
growth.
has space.
Heritage has space. Yep.
You're in the time period right now where we have like enrollment projections. The enrollment projection, the enrollment number we had a week ago was different than Friday. It actually went down. And then part of what Julie's dealing with is people coming in. But anybody who's left, you may not receive that communication from either the family or the subsequent school district. So over the next few days, you're gonna see kind of that ebb and flow to see where the true numbers are. But yeah, we've been watching them pretty close.
Well, we will continue to put this together based on your feedback and, you know, get a little head start on 23, 24 and keep moving that forward. And with the September board meeting, we finally get rid of 1 year and then we can just focus on 2 years. So we're looking forward to that. That's all we had. So thank you.
Is there anything else? We'll get it across. Motion to adjourn.
Yep, motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.